One of the things that I really liked about that last song, I can only imagine, for those of you who weren't here and able to see the song, is that I think each of us as parents can recognize when our child is born, we can only imagine the wonderful things they're going to have and the wonderful things we'd like to do for them. But the problem in life is this. A man convinced against his will is of the opinion still, same opinion still. Dale Carnegie said that. A lot of people have said that. I believe that's true. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And, one of the things, this is Jenga number 20, and it's on the Sabbath. Now, for those of you who are sitting here, you're here on the Sabbath. For those of you watching on Facebook, welcome back. I think we finally got our technical glitches figured out. For my brother-in-law and sister who are watching, thank you for watching. This is one of the ones that I think can be so completely misunderstood. And has been kind of a bone of contention for Adventists and other Christians since the dawn of our church coming around in 1863. So that's why I wanted to start off with something. In the beginning, God. Yeah, if you use that as a framework, and our scripture reading this morning talked about how God has created in 7 days all the wonderful things, in 6 days all the wonderful things we had, and then He rested on the seventh day. Now, people will offer different arguments about why you should keep Sabbath, and they'll say things like, well, man was designed to rest every seventh day. Well, that's fine, except it's not our seventh day. It's God's seventh day. It is the day that He rested, and I don't believe that He was tired. I believe as you read through Scripture and you see that there was war up in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, and how Lucifer was cast out of heaven and all his angels with him. There was conflict, and there were questions to be answered that are far beyond what we can even imagine. But the very basic question was, is God trustworthy? Can we rely on Him? Does He really have the right ideas? Or does this other fellow, Lucifer, he was the covering cherub, he was second only to God in the chain of command. And that's why so many angels followed Him. But in the beginning, God did all of this for us. And this is no different. Let's read through this just a little bit. And the narrative on the right-hand side is just that paragraph that I always tell you about from our book, 28 Fundamental Beliefs of Seventh-day Adventism. The gracious Creator, after 6 days of creation, rested the seventh day and instituted the Sabbath for all people as a memorial of creation. Now, you've heard it said before, I'm sure you have, if you've gone to any church and there's ever been brought up that, that's the Jewish Sabbath. Right? Were there any Jews at Creation Week?
No.
That was just Adam and Eve, right? And they were invited. Now, have you ever been invited to a party?
Mm-hmm.
You have, haven't you? Did you go? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more. I better back up and read that just on the left-hand side there. The seventh day, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. What does it mean to sanctify something?
Set it apart.
Do you have anything special at home? A certain set of dishes that you don't use very often, or maybe you've got some knick-knack or something that's sitting on a shelf. Maybe it's that artwork that your granddaughter drew for you that you still have on the refrigerator at home. Right? It's something that's set apart, it's sanctified, it's special. It means something. And that's what God did with that seventh day. He made it special. And you know what He did that? He invited us to do this with Him. And it says, in Malachi, He says, I'm the Lord thy God, and I don't change. Now, that's kind of rigid, right? Don't we all have to change and mold ourselves to be different people? That may be true for us, but does God have any need to change? And I just want to go through some of God's characteristics here just a little bit to make you see why it's important that God doesn't change who He is. He has made His wonderful works to be remembered. He doesn't want us to forget about all of the good things that He's done. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion. That's from Psalm 114. And in Psalm 145, the Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and great in loving kindness. The Lord is good to all, and His mercies are over all His works. That's who doesn't change. That's what doesn't change about God.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness is right. Okay, some more of the narrative. And this gets a little bit wordy here. The fourth commandment of God's unchangeable law requires, well, let's stop there for a second. Remember, those of you who watched, didn't get to see on Facebook, last week we talked about the law and how the law doesn't change. And the reason the law doesn't change is because God doesn't change. And because the law is sort of a transcript of who God is. Okay? Now let's just say, for instance, we could change the law. Which one would you like to change? Would you like it to be okay to steal?
No.
It seems okay as long as you're the one stealing, right? How about, would we like it to be okay to kill?
No.
Well, as long as we're the ones doing the killing, right? We don't want to be on the receiving end of any of the bad things that are listed in the Ten Commandments, do we? So, if we don't want to be on the receiving end of the bad consequences, certainly we would want to be on the good end of those things as well. And to know that somebody's character is such that they won't change who they are, despite whatever the circumstances are. Think about this for a second. Jesus was tortured and spit on, slapped in the face, and he still said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Now, which one of us in a similar situation would feel that way about our captors? Probably not very many. Okay, the fourth commandment of God's unchangeable law requires the observance of this seventh-day Sabbath, a day of rest, worship, and ministry in harmony with the teachings and practices of Jesus, the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, the first time I heard this was nearly 40 years ago. And I was just livid. I was at this evangelistic seminar. Wayne Gayton was in Albert Lee, Minnesota. Well, actually, we were in Wells, Minnesota. He was putting on this evangelistic seminar, and he talked about the fourth commandment. He talked about Saturday being God's biblical Sabbath day. And I was mad. I went home, I was just steaming. After all, I felt like Denise had drugged me to these meetings that I didn't want to go to anyway. And I think it was like the first one or the second one. And I was just hot. And I went home. I went back to Denise's mom's house. And we were talking about that. I was just fuming. And Brigitte, Denise's mom, looked right at me and said, well, you know, he's right. I thought, wait a minute, you're a Lutheran, you go to church on Sunday. How can you say that, you know, what gives those Adventists the right to change what day you go to church? You always go to church on Sunday. He said, well, not really. And she went over to the bookshelf. Now we go to Google, right? She went to the bookshelf and she pulled out the Encyclopedia Britannica. And there it said, Sabbath, God's holy day of rest. Sunday, a day kept by most of Christians. And I thought, wow, I've been wrong all these years. How could that possibly happen? Now, I'm going to give you what I consider to be very common sense arguments for why Saturday is the Sabbath, why it is the seventh day, and why God hasn't changed any of that. The first thing that I want to share with you are the Jewish people. Anybody know any Jewish people? Ever seen them on television or something? You kind of recognize Jewish people. And you know what's special about Jewish people? They go to church on Sabbath. They keep the Sabbath. Now, how long have the Jews been keeping the Sabbath? Since the dawn of time. Since there was a Jewish person. And you know why they keep the Sabbath? Because in their belief structure, if they did not keep Sabbath to a strict set of guidelines, living inside this little box, and believe me, they wrote out all sorts of things. They said, how many letters can you write on the Sabbath? Now, they weren't talking about pages of letters that you wrote to your friends. They're talking about individual characters. How far can you walk on Sabbath? But they had little exceptions for themselves because they wanted to be able to go places. They said, well, if you stopped somewhere and had a meal, so they would, on Friday, they would pack a sack lunch and they would leave it over here somewhere. So they would walk as far as that rock or tent or whatever, and they would have their little lunch and then they could go back on. I know Jewish people who have servants that are hired to turn their lights on and off. I know other Jews who believe that they shouldn't make anybody work, so they have an automatic lighting system, so their lights will come on and off, and they don't have to turn on the lights. But it was so important to them to keep Sabbath holy. I can't imagine in the farthest reaches of my mind that any changes in calendar or anything else would have changed the day. Right? Now, many of us have had opportunity to take a flight somewhere. Denise and I are going to go celebrate our 60th birthdays here later on in the month, and we're not flying Hawaiian, but that's just, we're flying Delta. But we have tickets. It says 119 at gate whatever in Denver, Colorado. And here's the thing. If we show up at that time, can we get on the plane?
Yes.
Right? We can. We've got the ticket. It's bought. It's paid for. It's there. And for people that I offer to go with me, they've got the ticket too, right? And what can prevent you from doing that? Just don't show up. And what happens if you don't show up? You don't get on the plane. You don't get to take that trip. You don't get to be with those people that you love. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that God doesn't show up for church on Sunday. Okay? Because God loves everybody. In fact, I think if you showed up for church on Tuesday, God would show up as well. But today's a very special day in our family because it's Denise's birthday today. It's not Denise's birthday yesterday or the day before or tomorrow. It's her birthday today. And we love her and we admire her, and so we want to be here with her. If someone asks you to do something and you love that person, say for instance your brother lives clear across the country in a different state, and he's going to get married. And he invites you to come to his wedding. He says, you know what, I'll give you a bus ticket, a plane ticket, I'll pay for your gas, whatever it takes, I'll get you there, and I want you to be there. You say, you know what, I guess I'd rather be with my friends. How much do you really love that brother? I don't want to make this a whole huge guilt trip. But if somebody asks you to do something, and you say you love that person, you say, my work is more important, my friends are more important, going to parties, whatever, that's all more important. That doesn't really demonstrate. So let's skip out of that for just a second, because a lot of people think that the Sabbath was changed from Saturday to Sunday. And it was, in some people's minds. There was a Roman emperor named Constantine, and he lived back in 280 to 337. He was the first Roman emperor to become a Christian. Now, in those days, Sabbath was a day full of restrictions. You couldn't eat, you couldn't do this, and it's just all this long list of things, because the Jews were so afraid of breaking any of the rules and incurring God's wrath that they decided they were going to make this just a terrible feast day. Well, guess what day Sunday was the next day, right? It was worshiping the sun god. And so what they did is they had huge parties and everybody was having a great time. And so what Constantine did is he said, you know what? We're going to just, as a mechanism of unifying our churches and our people, we're going to all start worshiping on Sundays. Well, guess what? You just fasted all day on Saturday. Are you going to show up for a party on Sunday? Sure you are. Especially when the Roman emperor says if you don't do it, there's a consequence. So they all decided to go to church on Sunday. And that's how it happened for some people. Now, I've heard before that there was a calendar change. There was. This is the calendar. We went from a Julian calendar to a Gregorian calendar. People have not always been good with astronomy and things like that. And back in the time of Moses and other people, there were 30 days in a month, period. That doesn't work out mathematically with what we know about science today, right? So they figured out that they lost, somewhere there, they lost like 10 days. So this is the calendar. They went 1, 2, 3, 4, 15. The weekly cycle didn't change. It was still there. Okay, and so then the next question comes up, well, weren't those rules nailed to the cross? Right, we talked about that last week. For those of you who weren't watching, we talked about the law last week. And I said, one of the things that most people don't believe about Seventh-day Adventists, or don't know about Seventh-day Adventists, we agree with you. The law was nailed to the cross as a means of salvation, as a checkbox, as a punch list of things you had to do in order to be saved. We believe that God is the one who saves us. Jesus Christ saves us. It is by grace that we are saved through faith, not of anything that we do. But here's the thing. If we love somebody, we're going to do what they ask anyway, right? And besides, if the Ten Commandments are a transcript of God's character, let's pick which commandment we want to throw out. We talked about that just a minute ago. How about the one about jealousy? Thou shalt not covet. Should we just throw that out? You know how you like to be jealous about other people. The clothes they have, the cars they have, the food they have, the money they have, the job they have, etc. You know how much fun that is to feel jealous of other people, right?
No.
No, we don't want to throw that one away? How about you shall have no other gods before me? That seems like a good one to throw out because we've got a lot of things that we would like to put in place of God, right? But where does our life go when we do that? We become filled with anxiety over so many different things. All right, one more thing I want to share with you about how the Sabbath got changed was just simply this. Because I said so. Now that doesn't seem like a very good reason, and I tell you, I heard that so much as a child that I swore that I would never say that to my kids. Now I probably said it a time or two out of frustration, but for the most part, I would annoy my children with long explanations as to why this was happening. Not because I said so, but because of these different things. But you know what? The largest church on the planet has somebody in charge who says, I believe that Sunday is the day of worship because I said so. And here's the thing. This proves how important I am because I can say so, and guess what? It happens. And not only does it happen in my church, but because I did it for my church, then everybody else's church is doing it too. Except for some of the people that meet down the street, and I'm not naming names here, okay? Because this isn't a judgmental thing, okay? This is how that church is structured. That they have one person who's in charge of so many things, and that person has the right to say that. Now, there's another church down the road, and they have a prophet who looked at this and said, you know what? I am changing the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday for our church. Real popular church. It's one of the fastest growing churches on the planet. Anyway, I'm not going to name any names. But is that the reason you should change your day of worship? Because somebody somewhere said to. Or should we base our decisions on what God said to? All right, here's some more of the narrative here. Sabbath is a day of delight. It's a delightful communion with God and with other people. It's a time to spend with your family. It's a time to gather together in worship and thinking about God. It's a time to spend with your friends. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, as the scriptures tell us. God gave us this special day so that we could spend time remembering how good we have it. It's a time when we can, as beat up as we are physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all week long, we can come here on Saturday and we can get our wounds licked and get the balm of Gilead applied to all of our wounds so that we can be that healthy, whole, happy person that God intended for us to be. Anybody know what these are? These are symbols. If you see these symbols, you know American Red Cross, you know Boy Scouts, you know the seal of the President of the United States. And you know what? As a church, we believe that Saturday is a symbol of our relationship with God. And I want to emphasize that with a story from the Old Testament. There was an Israelite fellow, and for whatever reason we won't go into, he had gone to a woman to offer to pay her in order to have sex with him. And so they made their arrangement. They were getting in the process, and she took one look at him. She says, "Oh, I see that you're a Jew." How would she know that by looking at it? All those people look the same, right? Just like all us white people look the same. But they do. They're all from the same area of the country. How can you tell it was a Jew and not somebody else?
He was circumcised.
He was circumcised. And that's a whole other thing. But that was one of the things that Abraham was given by God to set them apart, to show that they're different. Just like the Sabbath is a sign, a symbol that sets us apart. And same with the Jewish people, and there's Seventh-day Baptists, and there's Worldwide Church of God, and there's a lot of other people that keep Sabbath. It's not just Seventh-day Adventists that do this. But it's a symbol. And it's a symbol of what? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and all the seas and everything that's in them. And he rested and he celebrated that. And when Jesus died on the cross, guess which day that was? We all remember that, right? Easter's coming up here. We've had Ash Wednesday and Easter's coming. And we have Good Friday, right? And then what's the next day? What's the next day after Good Friday? Saturday. Saturday is the Sabbath. And guess what Jesus did on the Sabbath? He rested in the tomb. Just like he rested after answering all the questions about creation, now after answering all the questions about redemption and about God's wrath and God's anger, because remember when Jesus said, "It is finished," Father, I finished the work that you've given me to do. I've made your character known to men. It is finished is a big set of words. And guess what he did after that? He rested. Early on Sunday morning, he rose, and the rest is history. So what we have here is a symbol of our redemption. Redemption in Christ. It's a sign of our sanctification. And it serves as a token of our allegiance and a foretaste of our eternal future in God's kingdom. Now, guess what? Has the Sabbath been abused by Seventh-day Adventists, Worldwide Church of God, Seventh-day Baptists, anybody Jews, anybody who keeps the Sabbath? Has it been abused? Yeah. Has it been used as a whip to some people? Have you ever heard somebody say, well, you've got to keep the Sabbath? Well, of course you do. No, I don't. It's like somebody comes to you and says, well, you've got to eat a Snicker bar. No, I don't. I can refuse that. Well, guess what? If somebody offers me a Snicker bar and I don't eat it, I'm the one that misses out on the Snicker bar. That's assuming you like Snickers. Now, for maybe some of you, maybe it has to be an orange or a grapefruit or something. But if somebody offers you something and you refuse, yes, you miss out. But so does the parent or the person offering you that gift. Just like in that song, I can only imagine. And when you think about your children when they're born and you're holding them in your hand, you can only imagine the wonderful things. Little Madison, you can only imagine the wonderful life that she's supposed to have. What if she refuses that wonderful life? The world is full of people that are refusing the wonderful life. God said, I want you to have exceedingly abundantly above all you can ever hope or dream of. And there are people right now today that refuse that. Part of that gift is the Sabbath, because joyful observance of the holy time from evening to evening, sunset to sunset. In Genesis it said that evening and morning, first day. Evening, morning, second day. And I think it's interesting that even when it comes to the Sabbath, that God starts us off with rest. What do you do on Friday night?
Go to bed.
What do you do on Thursday night, Wednesday night? You go to bed. Most people, unless you're one of those night owls, night shift people that stay up all night and work. By the way, that's crazy. If my daughter is watching, she's a night nurse and she likes working nights. I did that for a long time. It was all about the shift differential. I really didn't like working nights, right? But they'll pay you more to work nights because they know nobody wants to be crazy enough to do that. So they have to incent it. Anyway, so we know that from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, that's the time of the Sabbath as set up in creation. It is a celebration of God's creative and redemptive acts in your life, in your friend's life, in your family's life. That's what God had for us in mind. Isaiah 66, 22 and 23. And when you say, well, that's all been done away with and we won't have this, listen to Isaiah. He's talking about after the world is destroyed and there's a new heaven and new earth. See, right here it says it. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make, and this is coming straight from God, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come and worship before me, saith the Lord. Now, I am one that loves to speculate on stuff, right? And one of my speculations is God created the earth to answer questions and rested the seventh day. He had the story of redemption, ended on Friday, rested on the seventh day. I think that when Jesus comes again, it's going to be on Friday. So that our first day in heaven is a day of rest and celebration. That's just me saying that, I don't know. But that just seems to make sense. Because all of this time, He has surrounded the Sabbath with so many things to give us meaning. And He may have a photo album at home. You do, don't you? Why do you bother? Because you like to remember those things, right? And the same is true. And the Sabbath gives us that opportunity to remember those things. This is a verse that's been misused and abused by so many people over time. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing what you please on my holy day, then you will find your joy in the Lord. I see that more as a promise. When you've reached a place in your life where you're no longer concerned about yourself and you're more concerned about other people, you're more concerned about God, that's when it's going to click for you. That's when you really decide that you're having joy. Because, our life is full of worry. We worry about the clothes we wear, the job we have, and everything else. Can you add 1 inch to your stature by worrying about it? Can you add 1 day to your life? Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard change his spots? God is the only answer for all of these dilemmas that we have. Why doesn't anybody like me? Why can't I make any friends? Why does school have to be so hard? God is the answer for that. We've had numerous students come through school here at the college, and I see them working so hard, and on Sabbath after church they'll go home and they'll study. And I'll say, don't do it. Give God His time, and it will reward you. I was an older student going through school, and I had a family, and I never studied on Sabbath. I said, God, this is your time. I want you to have it. So I spent time with God. I spent time with my family. I spent time in personal rest from the exhaustion of being a full-time student. And I was able to pass the test. I got a license. I got a job. And here I am today. God has things in store for you. And we don't have to drive ourselves crazy trying to earn a living. We need to put God first. And this is one that was mentioned in our little Bible study class earlier this morning. And I think it's very apropos for the Sabbath as well. Woe unto you, teachers of the law and Pharisees and hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And then when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Sometimes we can overdo that push, and we can make this seem like a legalistic thing to do, that you have to do. But look at what Paul says in Romans. He says, one person esteems one day above another. One person esteems every day alike. Let each of you be fully convinced in his own mind. And you know, the truth of that is I can't judge you, and you can't judge me over what we decide to do. That's not our job. God says, don't judge other people. Let me be the judge of that. You know, we all have to give an account for what we've done. How we've used our time, our money, our talents, our resources. And God's the one who's in control of it. You remember the story where where Jesus said that there was a rich guy and he gave out so many talents to these different guys. And he asked them to put them to good use. Gave one guy 5, gave one guy 10, and gave another guy 1. And he came back at the end of the season and asked them to produce it. And the guy he gave 10, he says, here, I give you 20 back. And the guy he gave 5, he says, well, I'll give you 10 back. And the guy who had 1, he says, I knew that you were gathered where you didn't plant, etc. You know, and you're really kind of a mean guy, so I just stuck it in the ground. And the rich farmer said, you know, you could have at least put it in the bank so I could have gotten some interest off of it. But that's not what it was. Let no man therefore judge you by what you eat or drink in regard to religious festivals, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. I am going to offer you this as well. I think we have been misreading this for a long time. I think what this is really saying, if you choose to keep doing those things, don't let anybody make fun of you about that. It's like when Paul said to Timothy, don't let anybody make fun of you because you're a young man. Don't let people make fun of you because you're short, or heavy, or wear glasses, or you're bald. Don't worry about those other people. Worry about what God thinks about you. And this is Albert Einstein. And I think this is wonderful. I've just got 2 slides left. And I'm running out of time anyway. An autocratic system of coercion, in my opinion, soon degenerates. For force always attracts men of low morality. And I believe it to be an invariable rule that tyrants of geniuses are succeeded by scoundrels. For this reason, I have always been passionately opposed to a system such as we have seen in Italy and Russia today. God is not a God of force. He's not requiring you. He's offering you. And the final sentence from the paragraph, the Sabbath is God's perpetual sign of his eternal covenant between him and between his people. I don't know how many people out there wear a wedding ring. Right? Quite a few people. Why? Because you want to be able to show other people, I'm married. I see girls at work show, oh, look how big my diamond is. They want to be able to demonstrate, to show other people that they have an allegiance and a loyalty to this one person. Sabbath is one of those things. And trust me, having done this for 40 years now, people will look at you different, they'll treat you different, and they'll think that you're a legalist because you're keeping Saturday instead of Sunday. They'll say, oh, look at all the things you're missing out on, all the ball games, all the, et cetera, all the things you're missing out on. Well, maybe. But I look at all the things that God has given me, and all those other things kind of pale in comparison. God has given us a special gift in this day, this seventh day, this Sabbath, a time when we can spend with him to recreate ourselves, to regenerate ourselves, to learn to live the kind of life that God wants us to live. And if we don't keep it, we're the ones that lose.